So cooking bone broth does not have to be hard or complicated at all. In fact, it's an incredible way to use up whatever leftover bones or scraps you have in the kitchen. So if I'm making bone broth from a red meat animal like a cow or a pig or even venison, I typically roast the bones. It gives it better flavor and gives the broth, the final bone broth, a really nice color. And in order to do that, all I do is I take the bones and the scraps. So this right here is just shin meat and bits and pieces of marrow bones, and I put them directly into a pan, sticking them in the oven 450 degrees for a total of about 40 minutes. After about the first 5 or 10 minutes, when some of the fat and the marrow renders out, I'll grab some of that fat or marrow and I use it to coat all of this to give it a really nice flavor. Stick it back in, move them around every now and then, and when the meat and the bones are cooked to a really nice dark brown color, I'll take them out, stick them directly into the pot, and add all of my leftover vegetable scraps and bay leaves and some peppercorns. And that's it. Whenever I'm trimming carrots or celery or onions, I always wash the vegetables first, and I save everything that I take off of them. Anytime I'm peeling the carrots, cutting the ends, or taking the skin off the onions, or even trimming the celery, I take all those scraps, stick them in one bag, stick this bag in the freezer. I keep adding to it every time I'm trimming more vegetables. And when I have enough vegetables and enough bones and carcasses to make a bone broth, I stick them all in the pot together, and it's a great way to use a zero waste approach to getting the most amount of nutrition out of all of your resources. So these bones have been roasting for about 15 minutes now, and one of the things that's happening is that this fat is starting to render out. You can see it collecting right there. It's not a necessity, but it's a great thing to do if you can collect some of that fat and redistribute it over the bones and the meat. It helps with the flavor, it helps with the visual appeal, helps with the final color. Typically, people, before they put the bones and the meat in the oven to roast, they'll coat it with vegetable oil. But that's something we're trying to avoid. So we're using the high quality animal fat and putting it right back on. But we need to have some of that render out in order to use it. That's why it goes into the oven for a good 10 minutes or so beforehand. This is going back into the oven. I'm going to redistribute these bones. Everything gets nice and brown. I might flip them 1 or 2 times before it's over. And when they're nice and brown, they're going directly into the pot. Okay, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Look at that color. That's what the 40 minutes at 450 degrees was trying to accomplish. Now my job is to take these bones and put them in my stock pot. All this incredible fat that's rendered out of the bottom, I'm going to use for another purpose. I can mix it with butter and make marrow butter. I can keep it on the side of the stove and use it for any time I need to cook with some kind of fat. Okay, so I've taken all those bones, put them in the stock pot. I'm going to add water. To cover the bones, and then I'm going to add a healthy splash of apple cider vinegar. That's going to allow the minerals to come out of the bones into the broth. I'm going to sit it like this for a half an hour, an hour. Then I'm going to turn up the heat to high, bring it to a boil. I'm adding the rest of my carcasses of any of the bones, all my vegetable scraps, bay leaf, and peppercorn. Once this comes to a boil, I'm going to skim, put it on simmer, and allow it to simmer for about 12 hours or so. Okay, so the roasted bones have been sitting in the water with the apple cider vinegar for about an hour at this point. The vinegar has drawn the minerals out into the broth, and now it's time for me to add everything else that I have left. So in this particular case, we had chicken the other night, and here's the chicken carcass that's been sitting in the freezer, and here's the bag full of trimmings of carrots and celery and onions that I'm going to add in. And the onion skin is fine. It's going to make the final bone broth a little bit darker, but that's absolutely fine. These are going in frozen, not a problem at all. I'm going to add a few peppercorns and a couple of bay leaves. The heat's on high, and I might add a little bit of water to this, allow this to come to a full boil, skim it, turn it down to simmer, and cover it and let this simmer for about 12 hours. Okay, so this pot has been simmering overnight. I'm gonna take and use this bowl to transfer all the contents in this pot, strain it out in this strainer, and collect all the bone broth and the fat. You can see the fat accumulating here on the top in this container, and I'm gonna cool it down as rapidly as possible. Then I'm gonna stick it in the fridge, let the fat solidify. I can pull that off and reserve that for another use, and I have my incredible, nourishing, delicious bone broth right here on the bottom. Okay, so here's all the bone broth that we've strained out, and you can see right here accumulated on the top, this is all the fat that's come out of those bones. So what we have there is a combination of tallow or beef fat that was just there as fat, bone marrow that's rendered out of the bones, and even bone grease that's come out of the matrix of the bones themselves. So we're gonna take that and collect that. That is incredible nutrition and incredible flavor, and the best way to do that is to go ahead and carefully ladle it off right into a separator like this, and then I'm gonna pour it all into my mason jar and store it there. Or I could put this whole thing in the refrigerator, and this tallow has a high enough melting point that it'll actually get hard and solid, and we can pull it right off, right out of the fridge. Okay, so I've strained the bone broth and I've removed all the fat and reserved that off to the side. And now one of the most important things that I should do with my bone broth is to cool it down as rapidly as possible to get it into my fridge. Now, if you only have about a gallon or so, you can cool it down at room temperature or in an ice bath and then stick that into your fridge. But this is almost 3 gallons of piping hot liquid that I need to cool down as quickly as possible. It's going to take a while to do that at room temperature, or if I stuck this whole thing in the fridge, it's going to lower or it's going to actually raise the temperature inside the fridge. So I use these made by San Jamara, these rapid cools. I keep these in my freezer. It's just a block of ice that I put in here and it doesn't dilute it. I can cool it down like this, or I could put it into an ice bath, or I could divide it into smaller quantities and it would cool down more rapidly that way. The very last thing you need to do before you get rid of your bones is pick through them and grab all that amazing tender meat that's literally falling off them into this pan. Grab that, put it aside. I'm going to fill up my mug. Grab some of this broth. Enjoy.